Hey, welcome everyone to our next episode of our live Ask Me Anything. This time with Venkat Subramaniam, who actually doesn't need much of an introduction, I think. He's a renowned author and speaker on everything related to Java and JVM in general. He's written a lot of books and he's done a lot of presentations, some of which can also be found on our Go to Conference YouTube channel. Something we urge you to subscribe to. And today, Venkat is ready to answer all of your questions that you may have, especially the ones related to all of the things that he's actually a go-to expert in. We have received some questions already up front, so I will make sure to bring those questions into the talk here. And you can ask live questions here in the chat. Venkat, welcome. Let me start by posing some questions that we received up front from some of our viewers here. A lot of people are interested in how you and how they in general can keep up with all of the developments that are happening in IT and in the profession of even just developing systems in Java, because there is just so much to learn.
Yeah, Ernst, first of all, thanks for having me, and thanks for all the team behind the scenes who have helped us to organize this. I want to thank everyone who has joined. That's a really good question to start our conversation with, because after all, one of the things, I remember very clearly, graduating from school, from college, and telling myself I will never go back again. And then, of course, I went back for another degree and another degree. It took me a while to realize that we have a life full of learning to do. That's what we are as professionals. And that's what also keeps us really, excited being in this field, is to continuously learn. But I want to say one of the best ways for me to learn really is to realize that learning is a non-linear activity. We don't go methodical one step at a time to learn. We are collecting information from various sources. More than what we read, I think part of what's really important is critical thinking. And to me, critical thinking has been one of the things I took a long time to figure this out. But I wish I had been trained to critically think in a lot better way before. But to really take ideas and sift through them, ask the question, why does this exist? What are the differences? What are the pros and cons? And to be a bit more, optimistically critical about it, or constructively critical about things, is really important. And then one more thing I would quickly mention is, I'll use the words of Newton. Newton said, "I look the farthest because I am standing on the shoulders of the giants," he said. I keep reminding myself of that more and more. The strength that we have is a collective strength. We learn from each other. And to me, the best moments are when I go to conferences, when I go to user groups, to hang around with people and learn from each other. We want to definitely leverage that as well.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Fully agree. A lot of people related to this on learning is also, I see a lot of questions about career advice, like what should I do to actually go from a Java developer to becoming an architect? Or you're obviously in the expert business, so maybe you have something to say on that.
The key really is, I go to companies and work with different organizations. And one of the things I often scares me when I hear people, they don't put this in these words, but usually what I hear is, I'm an architect, I don't code anymore. That is something we should definitely go away from. I call those architects as PowerPoint architects, very dangerous people in general. An architect is, I consider them to be an expert programmer, if you will. And sure, you don't want to be spending all your time programming as an architect, but that doesn't go to the extreme where you don't do any more programming. That's pretty dangerous as well. So there's got to be a balance we have to strike. Well, when it comes to being an architect or a lead developer for that matter, or even moving forward into organization, a director and a CTO, what have you, we really need to have a fairly good, breadth of the technology and understand what, technology solves, what are the pros and cons, why should we use one over the other. But at the same time, we also have to have the depth of really relevance of solutions to what we do. So one of the things I encourage architects to do quite often is, when they come and tell me, this is great theory, I understand what you're saying, but they always end with the word but. And I always tell them, if you really care about something, you will find a way. And that is, being an architect, you get pulled into meetings, you got to, work with your customers, you got to communicate. but carve out about 1.5 hours every day, 90 minutes. Put it on your calendar and say, that 90 minute is for me to be an effective architect. And in that 90 minutes a day, I mean, if you cannot spare 90 minutes a day as an architect, you're not an architect who has the right priorities, right? You must be able to dictate your schedule and go pair with a developer for 90 minutes a day. Switch pairing with developers. The amount of stuff we learn by getting our hands dirty and pairing with them is just amazing. So as you grow into an architect, don't let go of your current skills, but widen them and broaden them and become deeper in what you understand and what you deal with, and learn from other people in the organization, other architects. I always prefer, if I want to write a book, I mingle with people who are writing books. If I want to write better software, I mingle with people who are writing better software. If I want to speak better, I mingle with people who are speaking better. So we learn a lot by, learning from others. So find the companionship, the camaraderie of the people around you whom you respect and are doing good, and learn from them to do that as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one of the reasons that we're doing meetups. So that's a great answer. Speaking of writing books, as you were mentioning, we got a question. Are you working on any new books at the moment?
Not at the moment, no. I just finished a book on Kotlin DSLs a few months ago, and a few things are in my mind, but no, I don't have anything in the works at the moment.
Yeah, okay. There's actually Kotlin is a topic that came up in a bunch of questions, mostly in questions like what are your thoughts on Java as a modern language? Is it still relevant? Will it catch up, as some questions actually use the term, with other languages? Where do you see things like Kotlin going? But also, where do you see the JVM going with this area of doing microservices and that sort of thing?
Yeah, I view languages as vehicles. They are things that allow us to transport ourselves to solve our business problems. So when we look at the languages as vehicles or tools, we tend to look at them very differently than something as passionate about programming languages. One of the things I always encourage developers to say is, I don't want to call myself as a Java programmer or a Kotlin programmer, because my job is to really do problem solving. That's what my focus really is on. So from that point of view, I have the deepest respect for languages like Java, because languages like Java are the ones that rule the enterprise. If you really look at, you got 10 million programmers or more who are using Java. So it's not going to go away anywhere anytime soon. But to the credit, if you caught me about, maybe about 7 or 8 years, or maybe even 9 years ago, I was that guy on the other side of the picket line, constantly complaining that Java is very slow moving. Java is not a good language at that time. And I changed all my stories about Java thanks to Java 8 and developments after that. So Java is very relevant. Java is very vibrant as well. And one of the things I like about developers of the Java language is they're not jumping on to just implementing features because somebody else has got it. They think about being very practical and pragmatic. They bring in features that are relevant, that are feasible, that are backward compatible, and also useful for the community of Java developers. So I have no doubt at all about the strength of Java today. But that doesn't mean there is no space for other languages. There definitely is. And we want this ecosystem to thrive with these languages. Innovation comes from several places. One of the things I often see developers use the word is, this language steals this from other language. I never want to use that word, because we are professionals, right? Humans have to progress. And this is about humanity, if you would think about it. We want to learn from each other, and we want to push the boundaries for the better of the field. And that's what is nice about these languages. Smaller languages have the ability to innovate and try ideas. The bigger, more proven languages have to adapt very cautiously, and Java is doing that, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. I think Oracle, the people at Oracle are doing a great job at stewarding the language, and especially the backwards compatibility that you mentioned is unprecedented, I think, for almost any language that they have. Let's see, we have a more personal question here, but I think it's an interesting one. Since you are so good at taking complex topics and making them explainable, is there any hope in seeing a Git course from you somewhere in the future?
No,
what someone's asking.
Definitely not. And the reason I say definitely not is not because of any particular technology. I want to really emphasize. The reason is I generally talk about stuff that get me excited. So I like programming languages. I like algorithms. I like data structures. I like about, expressing a certain idea in a certain way. And even though I may use a lot of different technologies together, I don't really tend to talk about a lot of those things. I mostly focus on, what gets me excited. So often I tell them that the reason I would write a book or write even a, talk about something is because I have a story to tell. And oftentimes I have more stories to tell about things I get, excited about, and fewer stories to really tell about things that I'm not that excited about, even though I may use them. So this kind of goes back to a question I see here also about, why don't you talk about things like Spring Boot? Well, mostly because, they are great technologies, but I don't just personally get excited about them. Over time, oftentimes I may talk about something because I'm really excited about it, or I may talk about it because I'm working closely with a company that wants me to, do training in an area, expanding to something that I'm not doing already. So I may get drawn into a few things that way, but I just don't, spend my time on a lot of other things because there are so many other wonderful things to spend on. We have to be, picky and choosy.
Yeah. Personal question about things you get excited about. You mentioned you just wrote a book on Kotlin DSLs. I don't think everyone will be familiar with the concept of applying things like internal DSLs. So can you mention some examples of where Kotlin DSLs are already being put into good use or might be used in custom systems?
In quite a number of places, actually. One really good example to look into, for example, is in Spring itself, right? For example, in Spring, the developers behind the Spring, framework have embraced the Kotlin language, especially for the flexibility and the fluency the language actually offers. So I was recently pairing with a developer who was, using in the DSLs, and you can specify the routing and things like that in a very nice, elegant way. That's one place where you can use it. There's also uses in various other areas. I've seen people use in a business environment more than anything else, where they are expressing their business problems, where they are, in a way, you're really opening up your API for your, expert users to be able to communicate with your system more effectively. So you keep seeing, a lot of these things in different places. Internal DSS especially are really powerful because you are able to host them on the language itself without having to write a separate compiler. And one thing that intrigued me about Kotlin as a solution for DSLs is the fact that Kotlin is a statically typed language. So anywhere you have seen DSLs being used, you are able to get the benefit of a quick fail or fast fail because of compilation errors that you're going to get before the code gets executed. So pretty much you can use Kotlin DSLs almost anywhere you would use DSLs, with an added benefit of getting the compile time support, if you will.
Yep. Yeah, great answer. We're actually at Trifork currently just starting to move into using Kotlin also for things like Gradle build script, where you get exactly those benefits, where you get the full code completion in your IDE because it actually doing. You get all of the errors up front time. So I think it's very nice. Let's see. We have some more questions here. Yeah, there was another phrase, so I think we'll skip that one. Because that's been answered. And again, how to become a better developer if you already have to spend your time on family and on other things. How you decide probably where to focus on, I think, is the real question there.
You found the wrong person to ask that question.
Yeah, that's what.
I am the one with no work-life balance, unfortunately. So one of the things that I've been passionate about, I started as a struggling programmer, and then, like everybody else says, I've been programming for about 35 years now. And when I started programming, I was eager, like a lot of other people, to really learn to become better programmer. And I'll be honest about it. I had been writing code for a few years before I wrote my very first book. And when I wrote my first book, knowing nothing about what it takes to write a book, I saw the review process going through the book, And I was blown away. Here I was creating a product that was controlling refineries. And if it blows up, people may die. And nobody cared about my code, right? And here I'm writing a book, which is going to sell for a lot less money than the products I was developing. And the rigor through which we went through the review process for the book was absolutely amazing. And I ended up actually learning a lot more about writing software, as much more about than to write a book itself. And I sat back and thought about it. Oh my goodness, if people will review my code that I write for production, the way they reviewed the code I wrote in a book, how better a software developer would I become? And that's one of the things I realized and decided to do. The first step in becoming a better developer, and I say that with almost as much earnestness as I can say it in, be shameless. That is what I would say. First of all, be shameless. If you want, the worst developers I've seen are the developers who protect what they do and they don't want others to critique it. So open it up, give it to a colleague and say, hey, criticize my code. Tell me how I can make it better. You don't have to accept everything they say, but you want to be open for that criticism. I think that's extremely important. So be shameless and soak up everything you can from other people's criticism of your code, and learn also by reading better software, reading good code. That's a great way to write better code as well. So learn by being critiqued, I would say, and be shameless about it.
Yeah. I also often hear people who write books say after they're done, oh, it was actually terrible and I would never advise anyone to do it. But then they do it again and again and they keep on publishing books. So as a way of learning is something like maybe not writing a full book, but writing blogs and that sort of thing. Is that something you would recommend?
Writing a blog, writing a talk to speak in a conference. And even if you don't have anything else, just find a colleague, student or a friend or a cousin, and teach them something. Because the best way to learn is to start teaching things to other people. One of the interesting parts about teaching is when you're trying to explain something to somebody else, you're trying to figure out a different way to express the idea. And I cannot tell you how many times I begin to learn that I don't know stuff when I'm teaching. I'll share with you one experience I will never forget. This was 20 years ago. I was teaching a course on C++. And I've been teaching C++ for about 6 years at that point. And I was in the class, I was teaching something, and I had about 100 students in front of me, and I could see that nobody understood what I was talking about. And I'm like, gosh, people, why don't you understand this? And they're like, we don't know what you're talking about. Then I said, you know what, let me come back tomorrow and I'll teach this again. So let's go home. And I went home and started thinking about it. And for the first time, I understood that I really did not understand this particular concept. There was so much depth to it that I had not even noticed it. And so the next day I went in and I explained it, and everybody's like, gosh, this is so simple. Why did you have trouble explaining it yesterday? I said, because I did not understand it yesterday as I thought I had. And that's the beauty of it. It's very humbling experience when you try to teach to somebody. Blogging is, form of teaching somebody, physically, but also to write a book. All these are speaking in a conference. It's really a way to learn. That's a great way to learn as well. Absolutely.
Yeah. A question that just came in on the chat is how do you think that the whole current pandemic, COVID-19, has changed the job of software engineers and will affect the future of software engineering?
I am going to be the contrarian because I'm going to disagree with everything that everybody keeps telling me. They tell me that everything is different moving forward. Things are going to change. I'm going to put my money on it and say, no, it's going to go back to exactly the way things were before. And the reason really is we humans are a social animal. I will tell you, I've been traveling around the world. My best day is when I go give a talk or work with a client or teach a course or do consulting. But when I finish it, I go to a restaurant, sit down with the developer, and for the next 90 minutes to 2 hours, we are talking about technology over a meal. I will never want that to go away. We are social animals, right? You don't want to be stuck in a basement like I am right now, where all you do is you see the world through the screen. What fun is that? So I'm going to go on the road the first chance I get, as soon as I can get. And I bet you that anybody who's serious about developing software is fun. The code is great, but I'm in this field for people like you and me interacting to learn from each other. So, let people say what they say, but I'm going to bet my money we're going to get back to conferences. We're going to get back on the road. We're going to get back to offices because we want to meet people. That's what we want to do. I would love to be stuck in a traffic again, honestly. I've been stuck in the basement for a year now.
Yeah, I know exactly what it is like. Last week, for the first time in months, I think I actually went to the office. It's you don't actually do anything. You just talk to people because you haven't done it for so long. So it does become a social experience indeed.
Yeah.
There was another question, but to the both of us actually, on how do you decide which technologies are worth investigating lots of time in and which one to skip for now?
Yeah, that's a really hard question to answer because I wish there was a method to my madness. So what I typically do is I hear about something, and the minute I hear about something, there's like a 30,000 feet or 30,000 kilometers, overview I want about it. Like, what does it do? What's the technology area? What problem does it solve? And when I look at it, I would say that's kind of interesting. That's what it does. Do I care enough about it? And about the second or the third time I hear about it, I will go a little deeper into it. Then I basically sift through it and ask the question, is this something I want to dive deeper into because it's an area that I care about or it interests me? So I will kind of scale it to different levels of knowledge I want to have. Something I'll have a superficial knowledge of, oh, I know what the technology is, but I don't know anything more about it. And something else is like, I know exactly what problem it solves. And if I need to, I'm capable of learning more, to something where I know a fairly good amount of information into it. So I really let my intuition and a gut feeling drive me that. And over the decades, I've seen this, right? I've seen some technologies being introduced. I would kind of say, I want to really look into it. And I would dive in, it becomes really popular. And other technologies, I would kind of look into it, I'll dive in, and it goes nowhere after a while. And then there are other things I would say, no, I don't want to really get into this, and then never took off. So you kind of learn from those experiences and apply it, but there's no real method to really saying this is how it works. Just gut feeling and intuition drives that.
Yeah, exactly. I would also answer something similar to there. Like, I wouldn't try to figure out too much stuff up front. Like, will this be a waste of my time, or should I really do this, and will this benefit me in my career, right? Just if you feel interested, just try to spend some time on it, and you will find out. And if you have an acute problem that you can actually solve with technology, you will automatically be driven to investigate it more because you will be applying it. When it's something new and you're not quite sure what it is yet, then it's just interesting to play around with, but don't spend time on it.
Oh, that's a beautiful response. I'm really glad you said that, Iris. I couldn't agree more. Even after 20, 30 years, I cannot tell you how some technologies that I did not apply so much, but knew about comes to the rescue, because your mind is like, oh, I've seen this one before, and this idea is very similar to it, yep. And you latch onto it very quickly. So thanks for that motivation. That's really useful.
Well, there's also a question here from someone who says, how did you get started to speak at conferences, which was one of the things we talked about?
Oh, that's a really good question. And I'm glad that question was asked, because I really think we should emphasize this more. To me, one of the key things in my development was when I was a software developer, young software developer working in companies, I was thirsty for learning. I want to become a better programmer. And so I was asking, where can I find better programmers who are passionate about programming? And back in time, I used to live in Houston as a young programmer. And yes, I had colleagues who were really good, but I was really thirsty for a broader community. And I'm talking about, nearly 30 years ago now. And user groups were different back then than they are today, but nevertheless, we did have user groups. So I started going into user groups and mingling with developers in the community. Then as years went on, I started, attending Java user group and .NET user group. And then I made friends in the community. And one of the deals I made with them is they will give 1 month every year for this guy called Venkat, whose last name is so weird nobody can say, come and speak in the user group. So every year, 1 month in Java user group, Houston Java user group, 1 month in a .NET user group. And it so happened that I was speaking in one of the user groups, and I was an unpublished author, unknown person beyond the local community. And a conference organizer visited to promote the conference. And this is where the fun is. This was Jay Zimmerman from No Fluff Conference. But this was the year the conference was being started. And he comes over and says, oh, I'm organizing a conference. And the people who are going to be speaking in the conference are James Duncan Davidson, the guy who wrote Ant and, Ant and throwing the blank at the moment, Tomcat. And Jason Hunter, remember the Kettle book for the Servlet API, yeah. Dave Thomas, the pragmatic programmer, Bruce Tate, the bitter Java author. And I'm sitting and thinking, oh my goodness. And he finishes his introduction, says, here's the conference, here's the dates. And then he goes and sits down. I get up and give my talk. And I finished my talk. I was putting my stuff away. And he came to me and said, hey, that was a good talk. I said, thank you. And he said, would you come and speak in my conference? And I'll be absolutely honest to you. I really thought he was making fun of me, because why would you want me to come and speak in your conference when I've never written a book? Nobody knows me outside my community. And here are the people who have created this greatest of technology in the world. And then that night I get an email from him saying, hey, again, great meeting you. Here's the conference website, show up and give this exact talk, nothing else. And that's how I started. It was a user group that led me to it. And today I speak in about 25 to 26 user groups every year. And part of the reason is user group is where I started, and I have the biggest a love for is the community of developers in the local cities.
Yeah, for me actually it was quite simple. I started to work for Interface 21 Spring Source, and part of my new job was to be speaking at conferences. So that's really what got me into conferences. So very quickly I went from nothing to speaking at DevVox and or at least a predecessor to that and that sort of thing. I think in general what a lot of people are scared of when they think about where should I get started with presenting is they think they need to be an absolute expert and know more than everyone in the room about something in order to be able to deliver an interesting talk. So I think that's something that you require a bit of a change of mind for, right? If you find something interesting, you are bound to be able to tell something interesting about it. And I think the other thing is that people are just look up to public speakers, and then are afraid to think of themselves being on that stage. So part of it is just go out and do it, I would say. It does help to actually explain things to people. Right. So start small within your own company. Do things for smaller groups. If you are scared of immediately applying for a conference, do some brown bag sessions. That sort of thing is also a great way to get started, I think.
And to speak at the local user groups as well.
Yep.
User groups are a great place to try out ideas and get the feedback as well. And one of the things to keep in mind is no matter how good we get, there are going to be always people who know more about this than we do. So the goal is not in a competition at this point. You want to share your story, your experience, your journey, and nobody can take that away from you. That's what you do as a speaker, is to share your experiences with the technology or the subject matter you're talking about.
Yep. Question here, just to come in, a very more technical one. What are your thoughts on GraalVM and the developments around there?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a very exciting technology. It is really intended to serve a fairly niche area that is missing out there. I'm a polyglot programmer, so I'm sold on anything that's going to give me the polyglot nature of things. So I think it's definitely going to be very predominant. It's a little bit too early to see what that is going to be, at least in my opinion, observation. But I think it's got everything right going for it.
Yep. Yeah, for those people who may be not familiar with what GraalVM is, since the question was asked, it's actually a lot of things, but in the context of Java, it's mostly used to be able to compile Java into native executable code. So it starts up really quickly, and the memory overhead is a lot less, so it makes Java suitable for things like serverless programming, for example. It's a bit of background. Let's see, there were some questions also that are more on the area of things that we already talked about, where you probably don't want to talk about this, so I'll skip those. This is an interesting one. It's a very specific one, but I'll try to paraphrase it a bit. It's basically saying, I have an application where I need to make requests to a number of different backends using different technologies, but it's like a scatter and getter. I need the response from all of those systems, and I need to combine it and then return that. So what is a good way to do that in parallel or with asynchronous I/O in Java?
So one of the things that has intrigued me over the years is, Java and C# to a great extent started with parallel computing and multi-threading. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say, I know this is a little hard for a lot of people to accept, is JavaScript got it right more than Java did. And over the years, we are beginning more and more, what we really want is not parallelism, but we want really asynchronous programming. Don't get me wrong, parallel is still very important, but parallel is useful for computationally intensive tasks. I love parallel. My dissertation was on parallel programming, but that doesn't mean that that's the right solution for everything we do. And with Java itself, very quietly, Java introduced completable futures back in Java 8. And now, of course, with Project Loom, we're going to see more and more of this asynchronous programming. Project Loom really is intended for I/O processing, not for computation-intensive task at all. So essentially, if I step back, maybe 3 years from now, if you ask me the question, the way I would summarize my answer 3 years from now is, if you have computation-intensive job, use parallel. If you have I/O-intensive job, use Project Loom or continuations fibers or virtual threads. So really, I focus on parallelism for computation intensive, and I focus on asynchronous programming for I/O intensive. The question that was asked really falls flat into that I/O intensive nature of things, and that's what we really want to focus on, is leverage the non-blocking I/O nature, and that's where you're going to get the benefits out of it.
Yeah. Thank you for that. There was another question here, which is says, well, okay, obviously we need to learn all of these new technologies, but how do you approach learning the domain that you are operating in?
That's a really great question. It's to be an effective architect, especially, and a leader or a team leader or even a senior developer, we should also spend enough time learning about the domain as much as the technologies and such. But one of the beautiful things is, we can mingle a lot with domain experts. I remember, I'm a consultant now, so I go from companies to companies. But when I used to be an employee of a company, there used to be a lot of time I would spend with the domain experts. And they were as eager and passionate people as we are. You go to them and say, hey, tell me a little bit about this. And 2 hours later, they're pouring everything they can about the domain and technology on you. But it's really important to take the time. I would even say, listen to videos, listen to talks on domain-related concepts. So spend enough time gathering domain knowledge as much as technology knowledge as well. But the fun part is there are all these people in the companies who are so eager to help us to learn the domain if we are willing to listen to them. So absolutely, that's a very important topic to spend the time on.
Yeah. Is it something that as a consultant, where you are obviously spending less time than someone who is inside of a project start to end, is it something that you struggle with to quickly learn the domain and then move on?
I'll be absolutely honest about it, right? It's not enough time for me to really learn the domain because I work in a vertical market, not a horizontal market.
No, exactly. Yeah.
I work across the domains, but what I do effectively is I leverage the domain experts when I go in. So the first thing I do when I go in is I say, who are your experts? Give them to me. And I want to work with them so that they will make sure that what I'm saying is actually relevant. So I leverage the power of the domain experts for me to really be effective in what we do. And that's really critical. Can't be doing this in isolation. That's not going to help anybody in the long run.
We already talked about newer programming languages, but I see the question popping up again. So let's focus specifically on this one. What are your thoughts on Rust? Also maybe as a replacement even for Java?
I don't think it will actually be a replacement for Java. I do not see that actually happening for a number of different reasons. And part of the reason is Java is so ingrained in the enterprises where it is.
Yeah.
And I cannot really imagine Rust being a replacement for Java. I would say again, languages have not survived in the past for more than 10 years. So Java is a complete outlier in so many ways. When you talk about Java being 25 years old, I think it's like more dog years than human years in terms of age as far as programming languages are concerned. So to replace Java is going to take a lot more, and it will be replaced eventually, right? It has to be. But if you ask me, will Rust be the one that replaces it? I'll be darned if it is. I doubt it will be.
Yeah. From what I'm seeing personally, I think Rust is much more going to be the replacement for a language like Go. I think where people are missing things in the Go language, but they still want the same benefits of being able to compile to native code and being fairly low level. So yeah, I don't see them being in the same ballpark at the moment. This is a very tricky one from Bart. What's the most relevant talk you've ever given?
Oh gosh, that's a really hard question because
Yeah.
relevance depends on the audience, right? Not me. So it depends on what the audience, are really interested. I would like to believe that all my talks are relevant, except that ones I give to my children, they always don't like me giving those talks to them. But I think all my talks are relevant to the communities I give them to. So I would say I've given talks on technologies. I've given talks on being a better speaker. I've given a talk on various other things, code quality. But I would like to believe that all of those are really relevant and useful to the audience of the time.
Yeah. Oh, there was a question I missed earlier, but Gajesh is asking because we have it written down here. In one of Martin Fowler's talks on architecture, he mentioned that the choice of programming language will also affect the software architecture. So to what extent do you believe that this is the case, and how would that manifest?
No, it's a fundamental choice. In fact, programming language is an architectural decision. One of the things I often talk about when it comes to architecture and design is the idea of reversibility. Reversibility is your ability to back out of a decision. And language choices are almost irreversible because it's expensive. Not that you cannot mix multiple languages into a particular application, but you cannot throw away the code you have written so easily. So when it comes to reversibility, you want to make reversible decisions more lightly and irreversible decisions more thoroughly. You want to have due diligence. So organizations have to take a lot more time and effort in picking the languages, and they make the choice too early, in my opinion, than they should after understanding a lot more about the application and the nature. So I think it's an extremely critical decision to make when it comes to languages. This is also the reason why when people often ask me the question, which one should I pick? And I always say, I'm sorry, that's not a fair question for me to answer because that's an answer that provokes my bias. But the decision should not be emotional. The decision should not be based on, our biases. It's got to really be driven by the technology decision based on the application and the needs of the application more so than what I like and what somebody else likes.
Yeah. I was just wondering, I think something that a lot of people make a distinction with when it comes to how languages affect architecture is things like being typed language versus untyped. So what do you see there in practice? Are you mostly in the Java space, so it's mostly typed architectures, or?
Not at all, not at all. So a lot of people don't know about me on this one. I take polyglot to the truth. I program in about 15 different languages. And if I were to count the languages I program in, I program in as many dynamically typed languages as statically typed languages. And I actually beg to differ from a lot of people. Again, don't take me wrong at all in these things. When people come to me and say they love TypeScript, I always ask them why. And the minute they say because of compiler support, I say it's a hype script and not a TypeScript. So I don't want those kinds of decisions to be driven. I used to be that programmer 25 years ago, scared about dynamic type languages. And I used to be programming in C++ back then. And when I spent enough time programming in languages like JavaScript, Ruby, and Python, and Erlang, my life really changed in the way I perceive these. When I program in Erlang and Ruby and Python, I enjoy the benefits of dynamic typing. One of the beautiful things about this is it really opens a door for the concepts of where you have design by contract versus design by capability. And when programmers program in one type of language, they go through their entire career potentially not getting a taste of a different form of design. And to me, that is really important to have a balance in a system. There's a wonderful gentleman called Ola Binney. I encourage people to Google for this. And Ola Binney has what's called a language pyramid. And in the language pyramid, Ola talks about how an enterprise system should have multiple levels where different types of languages must be used in different layers. He talks about one layer which has to be really very strong in verification, another layer that should be malleable. And when you look at the world of an enterprise system through his eyes, you look at it very differently as the need to bring in different types of languages with different capabilities in it as well.
Something that is not directly related to this, but I think that might lead to some discussion. Do you think it's important for development teams to have things like coding guidelines? And what about things like code review checklists?
Yes and no. I say yes and no because the worst is to have a draconian style that are required to be followed. I remember working for a client quite a while ago. This was, maybe a decade ago. They said, "Will you use a guideline?" I'm like, "Sure." And the next thing you know, they threw a 200-page document on me. I'm like, "Oh my goodness, no, thank you, no thanks." So the answer is yes. But the answer yes is not in terms of beating people with a stick, but it should be a very natural way that developers, if I'm going to pair with you and write code with you, we fall into place of a style very quickly than telling people, here's a guideline, go read that and follow it. So I believe in code reviews and guidelines guided by those code reviews. I definitely would agree with that. Also, within a community of developers, within whether it's an open source community or a corporate culture, we can influence each other and agree upon the styles and the semantics that we want to follow, and then guide that through in that way. I believe in guidelines evolved through communication than documentation, if you will.
Yeah. So obviously the next question needs to be spaces or tabs.
I'm in the space camp. I'm definitely in the space camp. And I've gone back and forth between those two, but I'm definitely in the space camp, mainly because I jump in and jump out of various different types of editors on a given day. Yeah. So I don't use one, again, this really depends on the person, right? If somebody is using one IDE and period, that's the only thing they use, then that's not a big deal for them. But for people like me, I use VI in the morning to IntelliJ to TextMate to what other tools I may bring up. I really want to have a consistency in my spacing, so it matters to me for that reason as much as it may not matter to other people who don't have to switch between tools like that.
Yeah, exactly. On the topic of languages, same person also asks here, could you describe your dream programming language? If you were to create your own language, general purpose, what sort of characteristics would it have? And would it resemble anything that we have at the moment?
I am not smart enough to create a language at all. But a few years ago in Devox, Belgium, I gave a talk. It's on YouTube, I think. It's called the Spearheading the Future of Programming. And I talked about what do I like to see in programming languages. And there are a few of those already there in languages today. I really like to see a lot more fluency. I came into programming for writing code. But the part I like about writing code today is the expressiveness of the code. In a way, if you think about it, it's like trying to write a poem, right? You're writing a poem to express love or sadness, whatever you want to express. There are infinite ways to express it. And that's what intrigues me about code. Yesterday, as an example, I literally spent 1 hour taking 7 lines of code and refactoring it. At the end of 1 hour, it was like 10:30 in the night, but I couldn't give up that code because I wanted to see it evolve to something better in a nice shape. And I enjoy developing code like that. So I want languages to be expressive. I want languages to be very communicative, very fluent. Pattern matching is something I love. I've used pattern matching in different languages. Another capability I want languages to adopt more often is destructuring, because destructuring combined with pattern matching gives me a nice ability to extract the data as I work with the data processing. So a lot of these features, they're not new concepts. They've been around for a while, but I want almost, these to be fundamentals in languages moving forward.
And someone here asks for the both of us, do you have any suggestions on an approach for dealing with legacy code? Because, for example, Joe Spolsky has written famously in the past that the big rewrite is almost always a mistake. So what do you do? How do you approach a big code base?
So the first and foremost, I mean, this may appear strange to say this, the first thing you want to do about legacy code is stop writing more legacy code. I remember this experience. I have usually most of my clients are long-term clients. I've got clients for several years, but I remember this one company I went to, and when I walked in, they said, "Oh, Venkat, we have a 5-year-old legacy code." And then I went back after 5 years and they said, "We have 10-year-old legacy code." And I asked them, what are you going to do about it, right? So put an end to legacy, first of all. So what is legacy code? Well, Michael Feathers defines legacy code in his book as a code with no test. I was talking to my dad 2 weeks ago, and he used the word legacy, and I started laughing. And my dad paused for a minute, and he said, "Why are you laughing?" I said, "Dad, I'm really sorry. I had to laugh because in programming world, legacy is a bad word." And then he said, "Why?" And we had discussion about legacy code for a few minutes. But the point is, in almost every other field, legacy is something you look up to. And in programming, legacy is what you run away from. Well, the reason we run away from legacy is it's unmaintainable, hard to understand, hard to read. So what do we do about it? Put an end to it. So find out what is legacy in your application, and from tomorrow, do less of it so that it becomes a lot better quality. If you can seal the legacy and contain it, then you can start improving it, right? I mean, it's like a dam that's broken. What do? Well, first you plug the dam and you make sure the water doesn't, keep leaking or burst into something bigger, then come back to, contain it and make it better. That's what we need to really focus on, is put an end to legacy before you start doing something about it.
Yep. Yeah, great answer. And since it was asked to both of us, we are dealing with quite a lot of projects in clients with legacy code. And sometimes we have our own legacy because not all clients actually pay us to actively maintain code. So then they come back after 10 years and say, "Hey, we need you to do something here." So yeah, I very much agree with the idea of making sure that you first understand the scope, encapsulate what we're talking about, and then see what you can do about it. And sometimes what I personally like a lot is, this is not just true for refactoring legacy, but it's true for every big chunk of work that needs to be done, is try to come up with a way to avoid having to do any sort of big bang. So always try to come up with a way where you can do things gradually, where you can move things step by step, where you can indeed have tests that actually prove that every step has the expected result, because that's typically where I see people fail. I think the big rewrite typically fails because it is a big bang approach, but other big bang approaches are equally bound to fail as well, right? If I want to migrate everything in one go, it will probably not just work.
Well, totally. But here's the problem, right? You rewrite the legacy to create the next legacy. What good is that? I was talking to a developer recently, and he said, "Hey, I've been working for 15 years. He said, "That's great." And he said, "I never had opportunity to write better quality code or code with tests because I always work with legacy." I said, "Yeah, I can understand it." Then he said, we started a brand new project 2 years ago. And I was like so eager to hear what he's going to say. And then he said, and we went off to create another legacy. We don't have automated tests. We don't have good quality code. And now we have a 2-year-old legacy system. I'm like, what good is that, right? So that's why it's to say, you know what? Yes, we cannot fix our past, but let's fix our future. But to go back to one thing you said, one of the things I always recommend developers to do is to, once you contain your legacy, don't go on a witch hunt to say, I'm going to fix everything. You cannot do that. So look for code where you are making a change. You are fixing a bug, making an enhancement, adding a feature, then carve out that area and put your maximum effort, because that's something where you are focused on right now. And then turn that part into a better quality code rather than worrying about all the other code written in the past. Hey, we can fix the past, but we can influence the future moving forward as much as we can. We should definitely do that along the way.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. I would also try to adhere to the Boy Scout principle, right? Always leave your code a bit nicer than as it was when you found it. Because what I find that helps a lot if you do that is it becomes part of a regular habit. Always when I am working on things, I will also be improving things that I find. Because otherwise you get into this situation, especially with clients, where people say, oh yeah, but actually what we need to do now is for the next 2 weeks, instead of a regular feature sprint, we're going to do our technical depth replacement sprint. Right? And that's when you actually run into problems, because people don't want to pay for 2 weeks of just fixing stuff that, well, you didn't get right in the first time. So just try to make quality and try to make things like testing and improving, try to make it part, I would say, of your regular process rather than something that will wait until we can no longer ignore it. I think that's an important thing.
Totally.
Let's see, we have, yeah, again, on languages, is Java lagging behind in the serverless world maybe compared to things like Python, JavaScript, TypeScript, those type of more dynamic languages?
I wouldn't say it's lagging behind, because the tools and the libraries and the frameworks are, really filling in the gap. In a way, I would even argue that you don't want languages to really focus on that particular area. It's a lot more beyond the language itself. Well, Java as an ecosystem, rather than language, I would say is not lagging behind, because I look at the Java ecosystem as a lot more broader than what just comes out of Oracle alone. So I wouldn't really look at it as lagging behind in that sense.
Yeah, I see more questions here on why you don't talk on frameworks. So I just want to mention that we covered this in the beginning. Venkat basically only talks about things he's really personally enthusiastic about, not just things he actually needs to get the job done. So it's nothing personal. I'll go over my list of questions that was sent before the talk to see if we missed anything there. That was the Git and the Rust ones. Yeah, so maybe also related to some of the avoiding legacy things. Another question is here, what do you think is the most effective way to develop defect-free software?
Ooh, I'm going to go out on a limb and say you cannot develop defect-free software. That's a myth in my opinion. The reason is, how do you get defects in software? Well, as humans, this is to err is our nature, right? We are that as a human. So I don't want to create a defect-free software. What I want to do is to make sure the defects we have identified do not come back recurring over and over and over. I want to be very absolutely emphatic about it, because people sometimes go overboard when they use these words. They say, you do TDD and you will not have bugs. I'm like, come on, please stop that. Test-driven development is not about having bug-free software. It is really about regression, making sure the same kind of defects don't keep coming back and back and over and over, and also to make sure that we approach this more methodically, so we think about problems we have seen, the edge cases, so we can reduce them. So is it possible to reduce the errors? I totally agree we can. Is it possible to eliminate errors? Definitely not possible at all. That's just we're talking about something that is quite unachievable in that regard.
Oh, there's a question here on if you have any tips or tutorials on if you want to start doing TDD, on how to approach that.
Yeah, there's plenty of them out there. I've written books about it. I give talks about it. I do training and consulting for companies about it. But I would say find any resource that you can find and use it.
Yeah, yeah, I gotta just do it. And tips on convincing management in tech companies to do things like adopting TDD, pair programming, and those types of, let's say, best practices that may not always be perceived as such by management.
So I'm going to say something that is probably a bit disappointing. Every time somebody asks me the question, how do I convince somebody? The first question I ask them is, are you really, really convinced yourself? And a lot of times we're not convinced ourselves, and we are interested in convincing other people. And think about this for a minute, right? You are so determined that you love something, maybe a library, a technology, something. You don't wait for others to be convinced. You go do it, right? And so the first thing is convince yourself, deeply convince yourselves. Don't think that you're convinced, actually convince yourselves. Once you convince yourselves, don't go to management and say, this is good because it's so cool, it's so this, it's so that. They don't want to know about what we care about. They want to know about how does it affect them. If you can demonstrate how you are finding bugs quickly, how you are able to reduce the defects over time in terms of introducing newer defects, if you're able to show that you're able to maintain the software better. If you, as an example, I had a client of mine who wanted to do something, and they wanted to really start removing some code because their code had been becoming bigger in size. And the developer was convinced that this is a good thing, started doing things, and 2 years later he started receiving response from the customers where all of a sudden they are more agile today in their ability to respond they were before. This person, out of pure good faith, 2.5 years after I worked with them, decided to email me and said, hey, here is a email from my customer praising us. And I thought I would share it with you because you had a little part to play in it because you came and convinced us to do this. And I'm like, that's what you want to really show is a business benefit. So if you want to convince management, convince yourselves first, then translate your desires into business benefits so the managers and the business can understand it. The last thing I will mention this to you is I had a company that I was working with very closely, and they decided to send me to multiple cities in Europe for me to help their teams. And I'm sitting in the middle of the room working with developers and testers. And I cannot tell you how much opposition I got for what we wanted to do. And I literally said, folks, I don't understand this. You are technical people. Your boss paid me to come here and spend the day with you. And you are telling me you don't want to do this. And everybody in the world keep telling me management doesn't get it. And the technical people are awesome. And here I am with a team where you are telling me you don't want to do it. What's up with it, right? And that's the sad part is I go to companies because the management hires me to go in. And it's the technical people that I'm always constantly trying to convince that you should really change it. And so we think that the management needs convincing, which is true in some organizations, but not always, though.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. I think a lot of people already have made up their minds on how they are being perceived by management, and they already stop doing things because they fear it won't be allowed, or they fear. So try to create a culture where people start to experiment, I would say. And but something like TDD doesn't have to be a choice where we say for the next year our entire company is only going to be focusing on that, right? You can just start small, do it in a team, see if it indeed brings the tangible results that you hope it will bring, and then take it from there. And don't stop evangelizing, of course, good practices within your own company, right? If you do find that it does work, be enthusiastic about it, spread the word. On some of the problems that you just mentioned, like talking to lots of different teams, different companies all over the world, how do you deal with all of the different cultural issues that you come up there, and also things like explaining or persuading people to do things without telling them, you're just wrong?
Oh, it's really funny because I have a very different notion of culture than I did before I started traveling, and now I'm a firm belief that culture is not geographical. Culture is within a team. I would be in a city. and I would go to different companies in a city and I would see different cultures. I'll be in one company, a large company, and within the same building, I would see 3 or 4 different cultures. So culture to me is very community driven within an organization, not across countries at all. And I've seen, in all honesty, I worked in different parts of the world. I've worked in Asia, I worked in Europe, I worked in, the US. And at the middle of a day, you just call me on the phone and say, "Where are you?" And I would say, "I'm with developers," right? I would literally forget where in the world I am, because programmers have a similar problems we are all facing, the things we are fighting. But on the other hand, I would be, let's say, in UK, for example, but I would be just across town and I would see 2 very different culture within the same company. That is so I strongly believe in corporate culture rather than a countrywide culture. That's what really matters, is how good are we as a team and what are the things we focus on. And I'm really keen about developing a better corporate culture.
Yeah, and to continue on that question, do you have any tips for, as a consultant, how do you do things like persuading or getting people into a mindset where they want to change and adopt newer, better practices?
So one of the biggest, so it's kind of funny because, I started becoming a programmer. I was focused on technology. And over the years, I'm beginning to realize my key strength is not just knowing the technology, but a bit of a psychology, understanding humans and behavior and thought process. One of the 2 things I'll mention here. One is everybody has a confirmation bias. I cannot tell you how many times I'm sitting and talking to somebody, and what people are asking for is not a different way to do, but a confirmation that what they're doing is actually what everybody should do, right? Understand confirmation bias, first of all. The second thing is people don't want to be threatened, right? That's the very first thing. When I go to companies, I'll give you one example I would never forget. This was in Portland, Oregon, and they called me to fix a huge production problem. And I go in, I'm a consultant, right? I know nothing about their product. I'm sitting there and everybody in the room is angry at me. Why? Because they brought in a consultant and this consultant is going to go fix the problems for them. They've been having this problem in production for 2 full years and nothing I did worked. And about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I called the team and I said, "Folks, I want to have an open conversation with you. I know nothing. I can speak loudly, but I know nothing about your system. If we're going to solve this problem, it's going to happen because you are going to solve it. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to sit here and ask you all stupid questions. You're going to laugh at my questions, but one of those questions is going to click something in your mind and you're going to say, 'Oh my gosh, I know the answer. So could you all help me to be more stupid so I can help you to find the problem?'" And that conversation made all the difference with them. They're like, "Okay, Venkat, let's get this going." And within 3 hours, we found the problem and we fixed it. 2 years later, right? And all I did was be asking these questions and tell them, "I'm not here to threaten you. I'm not here to tell you you're wrong. All I'm trying to do is to fix this one thing you want to improve. I'm going to walk away from here and it's yours to keep moving forward. You are the leaders in this." So to really understand the human part of it is very important to communicate. People are not going to solve problems because a technology is better. They're going to solve the problem because they are part of solving the problem to improve the organization. So we shouldn't forget the human aspect into it.
I think that's actually a great remark to round off with. Given that I'm not seeing any new questions appearing and that it's 5 p.m. here, at least in our Central European time zone. So Venkat, thank you very much for being part of this Ask Me Anything. I think we actually got to answer all of the questions, both the questions that were asked up front, as well as the ones that appeared in the chat. If people want to reach out to Venkat, they can do that on his Twitter. Venkat_S is the handle where you can find that. We found out he does have a blog, but it's not actually that up to date. So just go to his Twitter. When it comes to these Ask Me Anything sessions, on March 24th, there will be another live Ask Me Anything session with Eben Boyle and Garth Gulmore that will be hosted by Adele Carpenter, who also hosted the last meetup with Venkat here. And if you are interested in learning more about some of the topics that we discuss with GoTo, then make sure to head over to our YouTube channel, where you can subscribe and like, which I think is the thing to say, but I'm not really that much into YouTube myself. So with that, let's round off, and we'll see you at the next live Ask Me Anything.